My name is Evelyn Sterling. I am 42 years old, and for the last 2 decades, I have been the invisible engine keeping Sterling Industries from collapsing under the weight of its own vanity. While my sister Charlene was photographed at the Met Gala wearing a dress that cost more than a mid-level manager's annual salary, I was in the back office renegotiating debt structures and smoothing over the PR disasters she left in her wake. My parents Archibald and Bernice Sterling called me dependable. It was the kind of compliment you give to a station wagon, not a daughter. They called Charlene extraordinary. I was sitting in my office in downtown Manhattan on a Tuesday morning when the courier arrived. He didn't look like a standard delivery man. He wore the slate gray livery of the private legal firm my father used for his personal affairs. He handed me a heavy cream envelope sealed with the Sterling crest, a lion rampant holding a key. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. Mandatory attendance required trust restructuring announcement, Highgarden Manor, Saturday 11 a.m. I stared at the heavy cardstock. My hand didn't tremble, but a cold knot tightened in my stomach. Highgarden was the family estate in the Hamptons, a sprawling manicured fortress where I had spent a childhood feeling like a guest in my own home. My father, Archibald Sterling, was the CEO of Sterling Industries, a conglomerate founded by my grandfather in 1948. He was a man who believed that affection was a limited resource like crude oil, not to be wasted on low-yield investments. My mother, Bernice, was his perfect counterpart, a woman who curated her children like she curated her art collection. Charlene was the abstract masterpiece, vibrant, expensive, and completely devoid of substance. I was the landscape painting in the hallway, functional, necessary for covering a blank spot on the wall, but entirely forgettable. The trust restructuring was ominous. For years there had been whispers that my father intended to retire, but Archibald Sterling was not the type to relinquish power voluntarily. He treated the CEO position as a monarch treats a throne. If he was restructuring the trust, it meant he was securing his legacy, and in the Sterling calculus, legacy was purely about image. I picked up the phone to call my sister. "Hello." Charlene's voice was breathy, accompanied by the background noise of a bustling cafe or boutique. "Did you get the envelope?" I asked. "Oh, the Highgarden thing. Yes, Daddy told me about it last week. You're coming, aren't you? It would look terrible if you weren't there." "He told you last week." "Well, yes. We were having lunch at Le Bernardin. Evelyn, don't be sensitive. You know how busy you get with whatever it is you do in operations." I hung up. The distinction was clear. Charlene was the insider, I was the employee. But there was something else gnawing at me, a sense of foreboding that had started 6 months ago, the day my great-aunt Constance passed away. Constance Sterling had been the matriarch in spirit, if not in title, my grandfather's eldest child, and the only person in the family who looked at me and saw a human being rather than an asset. I swiveled my chair to look out at the Manhattan skyline. The reflection in the glass showed a woman with sharp features, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that looked tired. I wasn't the high beauty of the family. I was the wow brain. And as Aunt Constance had warned me on her deathbed, in this family intelligence is dangerous because it sees the cracks in the foundation. I didn't know it then, staring at that invitation, but the cracks were about to become a chasm. I packed my briefcase not with clothes for a weekend getaway, but with the files I had been secretly compiling for months. Financial audits, trust bylaws, and a small velvet pouch Aunt Constance had pressed into my hand just hours before she died. I had a feeling I would need them. I was driving into a storm, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going there to fix the damage. I was going there to survive it. The drive to Highgarden on Friday evening was a journey through time. As the city skyline faded into the rear-view mirror, replaced by the manicured hedges and iron gates of Long Island, I found myself drifting back to those final hushed Tuesdays with Aunt Constance. While Archibald and Bernice were busy hosting galas, and Charlene was jet-setting across Europe, I spent my Tuesday afternoons in the solarium of Constance's townhouse on the Upper East Side. It was a room filled with ferns and the scent of old paper and lavender. Constance was 89 then, her body frail, almost translucent, but her eyes, piercing pale blue eyes, were as sharp as shattered glass. "They underestimate you, Evelyn," she had said one rainy afternoon in November 6 months prior. She was sitting in her high-backed velvet chair, a tartan blanket over her knees. "They mistake your silence for submission. It is their fatal flaw." "I don't mind the silence, Aunt Constance," I had replied, pouring her tea. "It lets me hear things they miss." Constance had gripped my wrist, then her fingers surprisingly strong. "Listen to me closely. Your father, Archibald, he is a man driven by a fear he cannot name. He has always felt like an imposter in this family, and because of that he needs to purge anything that reminds him of his own inadequacy." At the time, I thought she was speaking metaphorically. Archibald was the CEO. He was the definition of a Sterling. How could he feel like an imposter? "He is planning something," Constance whispered, her voice rasping. "He waits for me to die because he knows I am the only one who remembers the old laws. The Founder's Laws." She reached into the folds of her blanket and pulled out a manila envelope and a small silver locket. "Take these. Do not open the envelope until the day he tries to erase you. And he will try, Evelyn. He looks at you and he sees a truth he cannot bear." "What is in here?" I asked, taking the package. It felt heavy, heavier than paper should feel. "Insurance," she said. "And the name of a man. Theodore Blackwood. He was my father's attorney, and he is mine. He is retired, living quietly upstate, but he holds the keys to the kingdom. If Archibald makes a move against your birthright, you find Theodore." I vividly remembered the fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for me. It was the only time I had seen a Sterling afraid. "Promise me, Evelyn. You will not let them break you. You are the only real thing in this family." "I promise," I had said. Now, 6 months later, Constance was gone. Her funeral had been a spectacle of crocodile tears. Archibald had given a moving eulogy about family unity, while Bernice checked her watch, worried about the reception catering. Charlene had posted a selfie in black morning couture that garnered 40,000 likes. I had stood at the back alone, clutching my purse where the silver locket lay hidden. I pulled my car through the massive iron gates of Highgarden. The gravel crunched beneath my tires, a sound that always signaled the end of my autonomy. The house loomed ahead, a Georgian revival mansion that screamed old money. Lights blazed in every window. They were already celebrating, likely drinking vintage champagne, and toasting to the future, a future they were actively designing to exclude me. I parked the car around the back near the servants' entrance. It was a habit I couldn't break. I always felt like I needed to sneak into my own life. As I killed the engine, I touched the glove compartment where Constance's envelope sat. I hadn't opened it yet. Constance had been specific, "until the day he tries to erase you." Looking up at the house, seeing the silhouette of my father pacing in the library window, I knew that day had arrived. The air smelled of salt water and expensive perfume, but underneath I smelled a trap. I took a deep breath, grabbed my bag and stepped out into the cool night air. I wasn't the quiet niece reading in the solarium anymore. I was the woman who knew where the bodies were buried, even if I didn't yet know who had killed them. I entered Highgarden through the side terrace doors, avoiding the main foyer where the butler, Mr. Henderson, would inevitably announce me with a pitying loudness. The house was humming with activity. Caterers were setting up for the next day's brunch, moving trays of silver and crystal with practiced silence. I moved through the shadows of the hallway, heading toward the library. I intended to say hello, to play the role of the dutiful daughter arriving for the weekend. But as I approached the heavy mahogany doors of the library, voices stopped me. They weren't shouting. The Sterlings rarely shouted. They spoke in the low, lethal tones of people who believed their words were law. "It has to be done tomorrow, Archie. We can't drag this out." My mother's voice. It was sharp, impatient. "The board is getting restless about the succession plan. If you retire, they need to know Charlene is the undisputed heir." "I know, Bernice, I know." My father sounded weary but resolved. But Evelyn, she has been useful. She knows the operations better than anyone. Useful is not the same as suitable, Bernice snapped. Look at her Archibald. She has no presence, no fire. She is a drudge. If you leave the company to her or even a voting share, she'll turn it into a charity or run it into the ground with her caution. Charlene is the face of the future. There is the matter of the trust, Archibald said, the clinking of ice against glass punctuating his sentence. The Founder's Clause states that the controlling interest must pass to a blood descendant of the direct line. If I just cut Evelyn out, she can sue. She can tie us up in court for years. I pressed myself against the wainscoting, my heart hammering against my ribs. Blood descendant. That is exactly why we are going with the narrative we discussed. Bernice said, her voice dropping lower, but still audible in the quiet hallway. We deny the blood. You announce that she isn't yours. My breath caught in my throat. I felt like I had been punched. It's cruel, Bernice, Archibald said, though he didn't sound horrified, merely practical. It's necessary, she countered. We have the documents prepared. We claim that during our separation in '81, the one nobody talks about, I had a dalliance. We claim Evelyn was the result. You adopted her out of kindness to save the marriage. If she is not your biological daughter, the Founder's Clause doesn't apply to her. She gets the standard severance, the non-disclosure agreement, and she goes away. Charlene takes the throne. And the DNA? Archibald asked. She won't demand it, Bernice scoffed. She's too proud, and even if she does, by the time the results come back, the board will have already ratified Charlene. Possession is 9/10 of the law. We break her spirit tomorrow in front of the stakeholders. She will sign the waiver just to escape the humiliation. I slid down the wall, my legs suddenly unable to support me. They weren't just firing me. They were rewriting my existence. They were planning to stand up in front of 200 of New York's elite and declare me a bastard, a charity case they had tolerated for 40 years. The cruelty was so calculated, so precise. It explained everything, the coldness, the distance, the way they looked at me like I was a bad investment. They had been saving this lie for a rainy day, a weapon to be used the moment I became an obstacle to Charlene's ascent. I wanted to burst into the room and scream. I wanted to flip the heavy oak desk and shatter the crystal decanters. But then Aunt Constance's voice drifted through my memory. They mistake your silence for submission. If I confronted them now, they would deny it. They would gaslight me, spin the story, or rush the announcement. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be a Sterling, even if they said I wasn't one. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in my skirt. I didn't go into the library. I turned around and walked silently back out the way I came, into the cool night air. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope Constance had given me. My hands were shaking, but I ripped it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and a name, Theodore Blackwood, and beneath it a note in Constance's shaky handwriting. When you know the truth, call him. He has the rest. I dialed the number. It rang twice. Blackwood residence? A gruff voice answered. Mr. Blackwood? I said, my voice sounding like iron. This is Evelyn Sterling. Constance told me to call. They are going to deny my parentage tomorrow. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sound that sounded grimly like a chuckle. Archibald is a predictable fool. Meet me at the diner on Route 27 in 30 minutes, Evelyn. Bring the locket. The diner was a neon-lit beacon in the darkness, a place where truck drivers and insomniacs gathered, people my parents wouldn't look in the eye. I sat in a red vinyl booth, the silver locket resting on the formica table, between a bottle of ketchup and a sugar dispenser. Theodore Blackwood walked in 5 minutes later. He was a man carved from granite, easily in his late 70s, wearing a tweed suit that looked like it belonged in a 1950s courtroom. He carried a battered leather briefcase and walked with a cane, but his presence commanded the room. He didn't shake my hand. He slid into the booth opposite me and signaled the waitress for coffee. Black, no sugar, kitai, he barked, then turned his gaze to me. You look like her, more than you know. Like my mother? I asked bitterly. Bernice. No, Blackwood said. Like the Sterlings, the real ones. He tapped the locket. Did you open it? No, I didn't know how. He reached over his gnarled fingers, manipulating a tiny hidden catch on the side of the silver oval. It sprang open. Inside there were no photographs, just a lock of hair and a tiny engraving, Veritas Vincit Truth Conquers. Archibald plans to announce tomorrow that you are illegitimate, Blackwood stated, not asking. He intends to claim Bernice had an affair, making you a half-sister at best and legally irrelevant to the founder's trust. Yes, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. They want to cut me out completely so Charlene can inherit the controlling shares. Blackwood took a sip of the steaming coffee. It is a bold strategy. It relies entirely on the assumption that you will be too ashamed to fight back, or that if you do, the DNA test will prove that you are not Archibald's daughter. And isn't that true? I asked, tears finally stinging my eyes. If their story is a lie, a DNA test would prove I am his daughter. But if they are telling the truth, if I am illegitimate, then I lose everything. Blackwood leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Evelyn, you are looking at the puzzle upside down. Archibald is counting on a DNA test comparing you to him. He knows that test will come back negative. My heart stopped. So, it's true, he isn't my father. He is not your biological father, no, Blackwood said, calm. The world seemed to tilt. Then I am nothing. I have no claim. You have all the claim, Blackwood said, his eyes gleaming. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a yellowed document preserved in plastic. This is the Sterling Bloodline Covenant, signed by your grandfather, the founder, in 1950. It states that control of the company passes to the direct biological descendants of the founder. Right? I said, confused. And if Archibald isn't my father? Archibald, Blackwood interrupted, was adopted. I stared at him. The hum of the diner refrigerator seemed to roar in my ears. What? Your grandfather, the founder, was a brilliant man, but he had fertility issues. He and his wife adopted a son in 1952 from a distant cousin's line to maintain the name. That boy was Archibald, a secret kept to protect the corporate image of vitality. Archibald is a Sterling by name and law, but not by blood. But then, who am I? I whispered. Blackwood smiled, a sad, gentle expression softening his face. Constance was the founder's only biological child. She was wild, brilliant, and rebellious. In 1982, she became pregnant out of wedlock, a scandal that would have ruined the family reputation back then. The founder made a deal. Archibald, who was married to Bernice and struggling to conceive, would adopt the baby. They would raise the child as their own. That child was you. I covered my mouth with my hand. Constance was my mother. She was, Blackwood said, and she loved you enough to let you go, to give you a legitimate name. But she watched you every day, and she made sure the trust had a failsafe. The covenant specifies biological blood of the founder. Archibald has no founder blood. Charlene, being Archibald and Bernice's biological child, a miracle baby born 2 years later, has no founder blood either. She is the daughter of an adoptee and Bernice. He pointed a finger at me. You, Evelyn, you are the granddaughter of the founder. You are the only person on this earth with the DNA required to hold the controlling shares of Sterling Industries. I sat back against the red vinyl, the revelation washing over me like a tidal wave. My parents, the people who had treated me like a trespasser, were the trespassers. They were planning to demand a DNA test to prove I wasn't Archibald's, thinking it would destroy me. They didn't realize that the same test would prove I was the queen, and they were the usurpers. So, Blackwood said, closing his briefcase, tomorrow Archibald will try to humiliate you. He will offer you a test, and you are going to take it. I'm going to destroy them, I said, the realization hardening into steel in my spine. No, Blackwood corrected. You are going to let them destroy themselves. I will be there. I have the samples from the founder's estate ready for comparison. Tomorrow we don't just win, Evelyn. We rewrite history. The morning of the announcement was a masterpiece of atmospheric deception. The sky over the Hamptons was a piercing, innocent blue. Highgarden looked like a wedding cake sitting on a green velvet platter. White tents had been erected on the south lawn, ribbons fluttering in the breeze. I dressed with deliberate simplicity. I wore a navy sheath dress, modest heels, and no jewelry except for the silver locket hidden beneath my neckline. When I walked downstairs, the house was already filling with guests. There were board members in linen suits, socialites in pastel sundresses, and the sharks of Wall Street holding flutes of mimosa. They looked at me as I passed. The rumors must have already been circulating. I saw the tilted heads, the whispered comments behind manicured hands. That's her. Poor thing. I heard she's being cut out completely. I found my mother Bernice holding court near the fountain. She was wearing a blindingly bright yellow dress, her neck draped in diamonds that caught the sun. Charlene was beside her, looking like a runway model in pink chiffon, laughing a little too loudly at a banker's joke. Evelyn, Bernice said as I approached. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a grimace of social obligation. You're here. I was worried you might stay in your room. Why would I miss a family announcement? I asked calmly. Bernice stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. Listen to me. Your father is going to say some difficult things today, things that needed to be said years ago. If you have any dignity, any love for this family, you will accept them with grace. Don't make a scene. We have a generous severance package prepared for you. It's enough to live quietly somewhere. Elsewhere. Elsewhere, I repeated. You mean away from you? It's for the best, Bernice said, adjusting my collar with a patronizing pat. You never really fit in, darling. Today we're just making it official. Try not to cry in front of the cameras. She turned back to her guests, switching her smile back on like a light bulb. Charlene gave me a small, pitying wave before turning her back. I stood alone in the crowd, feeling the ghost of Aunt Constance beside me. The humiliation Bernice intended was palpable. They weren't just removing me from the company, they were erasing my identity. They wanted me to feel small, illegitimate, and worthless. But as I looked at the sea of faces, the people who judged worth by bloodlines and bank accounts, I felt a strange calmness. I scanned the perimeter of the lawn until I saw a dark figure standing under the shade of an old oak tree. Theodore Blackwood. He leaned on his cane, watching the proceedings like a grim reaper waiting for the harvest. He nodded once. The stage was set. Archibald walked up to the podium that had been set up on the terrace steps. The microphone squealed, slightly silencing the crowd. He looked distinguished, tan, and confident. He was the picture of an American patriarch. Ladies and gentlemen, Archibald boomed, his voice projecting authority. Thank you for joining us at Highgarden. Today is a day of truth, a day of securing the future of Sterling Industries. The crowd applauded politely. I took a sip of water, my hand steady. Go ahead, Father, I thought. Dig the grave. Sterling Industries has always been built on integrity. Archibald began gripping the sides of the podium. And integrity begins at home. It begins with the truth of our lineage. The silence on the lawn was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. For 40 years we have maintained a facade to protect the innocent. Archibald continued, his face adopting a mask of solemn regret. He looked directly at me then. It wasn't a look of apology. It was a look of disposal. Evelyn has been raised in this house. She has been given every advantage. But the time has come to clarify the line of succession. He paused for effect. It is with a heavy heart that I must announce a restructuring of the family trust. Due to undeniable evidence regarding biological parentage, Evelyn Sterling will be stepping down from all roles within the company. While we have raised her, the founder's trust is explicit regarding bloodline succession. A gasp rippled through the crowd. This was public execution. He was effectively calling me a bastard in front of the entire Eastern Seaboard's elite. Therefore, Archibald's voice hardened, my daughter, Charlene Sterling, my true biological heir, will assume the role of successor and future CEO, effective immediately. We ask that Evelyn sign the waiver of claim we have prepared, acknowledging her status, so that the company may move forward without confusion. Charlene stepped forward, beaming, waving to the crowd as if she had just won a beauty pageant. A lawyer from my father's firm stepped toward me holding a clipboard and a pen. The guests parted around me, leaving me isolated in a circle of green grass. The shame was meant to be crushing. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the weight of hundreds of eyes on me. They expected me to run. They expected me to cry. They expected the mule to finally collapse. Sign it, Evelyn, Bernice whispered loudly from the front row. Don't make this harder than it is. I looked at the clipboard. The document was a voluntary relinquishment of rights based on non-paternity. I looked up at Archibald. He was smiling benevolently, the victor. He thought he had won. He thought that by stripping me of his DNA, he was stripping me of my power. I didn't take the pen. Instead, I took a step forward. Father, I said. My voice wasn't amplified, but in the dead silence it carried. You are basing this decision on the strict interpretation of the founder's trust on the requirement of biological blood. It is the law of the company, Evelyn, Archibald said, his tone dismissive. I'm sorry it has to be this way, but we cannot ignore biology. I agree, I said. We shouldn't ignore biology. I turned to the back of the lawn. Mr. Blackwood. The crowd turned as one. Theodore Blackwood emerged from the shade of the oak tree. The sound of his cane hitting the flagstones echoed clack, clack, clack as he walked toward the podium. Archibald's face went pale. He recognized the man. Everyone old enough to remember the founder recognized the man. Theodore Blackwood was a legend, the founder's attack dog. Theodore, Archibald stammered. I didn't know you were invited. This is a private family matter. It is a corporate matter, Archibald. Blackwood rumbled, his voice gravelly and deep. He stopped beside me, standing like a sentinel. And as the executor of the founder's original estate and the attorney for the late Constance Sterling, I am here to ensure the trust is executed correctly. We are executing it correctly, Bernice snapped, standing up. Evelyn is not Archibald's daughter. Therefore, she is out. It's simple. It is simple, Blackwood agreed. But you have invoked the bloodline covenant. I have the document here. He lifted his briefcase. Clause 4, Section A. In the event of a dispute regarding lineage and succession, the claimant must submit to a genetic comparison against the founder's genetic markers held in escrow. Archibald laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. A comparison to me is sufficient. I am the founder's son. Are you? Blackwood asked. The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Of course I am, Archibald blustered, though a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. This is a stalling tactic. Evelyn is just trying to save face. If you are so confident, I spoke up, moving to the microphone that Charlene had vacated, then let us read the results. Mr. Blackwood has them. He anticipated this dispute. I looked at the crowd. My parents claim I am not a Sterling. They claim biology is the only thing that matters, so let's see what the biology says. Archibald looked at Bernice. Bernice looked at Charlene. They were confused. They thought the trap was for me. They couldn't see the one they were standing in. Fine, Archibald shouted, losing his composure. Read them. Let everyone see that you are nothing. Read the results and then get off my property. He thought the test would compare me to him. He didn't listen to Blackwood's wording, comparison against the founder. Blackwood placed his briefcase on the table next to the champagne tower. He clicked the latches open. The sound was like a gunshot. He pulled out 2 sealed red envelopes. "I have 2 results," Blackwood announced. "Certified by the Independent Lab of Genetica using the founder's preserved samples from the 1950 medical archives." He held up the first envelope. "Subject Evelyn Sterling." Blackwood tore the red wax seal. He unfolded the paper slowly. "Comparison of subject Evelyn Sterling to the founder, Jonathan Sterling." Blackwood read. "Probability of direct biological lineage, 99.9%. Result positive." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. "Wait," Charlene said, stepping forward. "That's impossible. If she's not Daddy's daughter, how is she related to grandfather?" Archibald looked like he had been slapped. "There must be a mistake. The lab made a mistake." "There is no mistake," Blackwood said. "Evelyn Sterling is the biological granddaughter of the founder." He picked up the second envelope. "Subject, Archibald Sterling." Archibald froze. Why do you have a test for me?" "Because," Blackwood said, his eyes hard as flint, "to prove lineage we must test all claimants." He ripped the second envelope open. The sound of tearing paper was the only sound in the world. "Comparison of subject Archibald Sterling to the founder Jonathan Sterling," Blackwood read. He paused, letting the tension stretch until it was nearly unbearable. "Probability of direct biological lineage, 0.0%. Result, no relation." The silence shattered. Silence, gasps, cries of shock, and the frantic clicking of press cameras filled the air. Bernice collapsed into her chair. Charlene's mouth hung open, her perfect composure ruined. Archibald gripped the podium, his knuckles white. "Lies. This is a lie. I am his son." "You are his adopted son," Blackwood's voice boomed over the chaos. "Adopted in 1952. A matter of public record that was sealed until you invoked the bloodline covenant." Blackwood turned to the crowd, holding up the documents. "The truth, ladies and gentlemen, is this. Evelyn Sterling is the biological daughter of Constance Sterling, the founder's daughter. Archibald adopted Evelyn to cover a family scandal. Evelyn is the only person standing on this stage who carries the blood of the founder." He turned to Archibald, who was shaking, stripped naked of his identity in front of the very people he tried to impress. "You wanted to use biology to exclude her, Archibald," Blackwood said softly. "You built a trap of blood, and you just walked right into it." I stepped forward. I didn't look down at my feet anymore. I looked directly at my father, no, at Archibald. "The covenant states that voting control belongs to the bloodline," I said, my voice steady, amplified by the microphone. "That means the shares you hold, the shares Charlene expects to inherit, they aren't yours. They never were. They belong to me." The aftermath was immediate and brutal, not in a physical sense, but in the swift, cold calculus of corporate power. The board chairman, Mr. Henderson, who had been sipping a mimosa in the front row, stood up. He walked past Archibald without looking at him and approached Blackwood to examine the documents. He read them. He nodded. Then he turned to me. "Miss Sterling," Henderson said, "the board recognizes the validity of the founder's covenant. Effective immediately, the voting trust transfers to you." Archibald was sputtering, his face a mask of red fury and panic. "You can't do this. I built this company. I ran it for 30 years. "You managed it," I corrected him. "And you did it by bullying, cutting corners, and treating people like disposable assets, including me." Charlene grabbed my arm. Her grip was desperate. "Evelyn, wait. We're family. We're sisters. You can't just kick us out. This is our home." I looked at her hand on my arm, the same hand that had waved dismissively at me 10 minutes ago. "You just stood there and watched them try to erase me, Charlene," I said quietly. "You were ready to sign the papers that would leave me with nothing. You aren't my sister. You're just an employee of a company I now own." I turned to the board chairman. "I accept the resignation of Archibald Sterling as CEO effective immediately. I also suggest we escort the non-shareholders off the premises to avoid any further confusion." Archibald looked at me with a mixture of hatred and terror. He realized then that I wasn't just the quiet girl in the back office. I was Constance's daughter. I had her fire tempered by years of his ice. "Evelyn," Bernice sobbed, reaching out a hand. "Please, we were trying to protect the family name." "I am the family name," I said. Security guards, unsure but following the cues of the board chairman, stepped onto the terrace. They gently but firmly guided Archibald and Bernice away from the podium. The guests, sensing the shift in power like sharks sensing blood in the water, immediately turned their backs on the falling king and queen. They turned toward me, raising their glasses, ready to toast the new regime. I didn't toast back. I watched my parents, the people who had denied me, being led toward the side exit, the same one I had used for years. The irony was perfect. 2 hours later, Highgarden was quiet. The guests had dispersed, eager to spread the gossip across New York. The catering trucks were packing up. I stood on the balcony of the master suite, my grandfather's suite, which Archibald had occupied for decades. Below, I saw a black sedan being loaded with suitcases. Archibald, Bernice, and Charlene were leaving. The estate was owned by the trust, and the trust was now mine. They could no longer afford the upkeep without the CEO's salary and the dividends that had just been frozen. I walked down to the driveway as they were finishing loading the car. Charlene was crying in the back seat. Bernice was staring straight ahead, refusing to look at the house. Archibald stood by the trunk, looking older than I had ever seen him. He looked at me. "You think you've won," he rasped. "But you're alone, Evelyn. You have no one. A company can't love you." "Neither did you, Go," I replied. "And I was alone in this house for 40 years while you were sitting in the next room. The difference is now I'm alone in the truth, and that feels a lot less lonely." He got into the car. He didn't look back. As their car crunched down the gravel driveway and disappeared through the iron gates, Theodore Blackwood stepped up beside me. "Constance would have been proud," he said. "She knew, didn't she?" I asked. "She knew they would do this." "She knew Archibald's vanity was his Achilles heel," Blackwood agreed. "She gave you the truth, but you were the one who had to be brave enough to use it." I touched the silver locket at my throat. Veritas vincit. Truth conquers. I looked back at the massive, empty house. It was mine now. The company was mine. But as I stood there in the fading afternoon light, I realized my inheritance wasn't the bricks or the bank accounts. My inheritance was the freedom to stop trying to please people who would never accept me. I walked to my own car, my sensible mid-range sedan parked near the servants' entrance. I didn't want to stay in Highgarden tonight. I wanted to go back to my apartment, order takeout, and sleep for the first time in years without the weight of being the bad disappointment. I am Evelyn Sterling. I was the unwanted daughter, the invisible fixer, the mistake. But today I learned that your worth isn't decided by the people who raise you. It's decided by what you are willing to stand for when they try to tear you down. Sometimes you have to lose your family to find yourself. And sometimes the blood that matters isn't the blood you share, but the blood you refuse to shed just to keep them happy. If you have ever been made to feel like you didn't belong in your own family, or if you've had to fight for your place in the world, comment the word "enough" below. Let me know I'm not the only one who had to draw a line in the sand. Thank you for listening to my story. My name is Evelyn Sterling, and finally, I know exactly who that is.